When Hannibal crossed into Italy, another Roman army kept going west. That quieter movement is easy to lose because the Italian campaign is louder. It has the Alps, the cavalry shock at the Ticinus, Trebia in winter water, Trasimene in fog, and Cannae as the great Roman wound. Spain does not enter memory with the same theatrical force, but the war there decides whether Hannibal remains one army in Italy or becomes the forward edge of a whole Barcid system. Spain was not a supply closet sitting behind the story. It was where Hamilcar and Hasdrubal had rebuilt Carthaginian power after the First Punic War, where New Carthage gathered silver, hostages, ships, workshops, allies and soldiers, and where Hannibal had found the depth to challenge Rome at all. If that base stayed free to breathe, Hannibal's war in Italy could be renewed from the west. Men could move, silver could move, ships could threaten the coast. Hasdrubal Barca could try to take the road his brother had taken and turn one invasion into a family war. Rome's answer began almost by accident. Publius Cornelius Scipio missed Hannibal near the Rhone, realized the Italian emergency was immediate, and turned back. But he did not bring the Spanish army home. He sent it on under his brother, Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio Calvus. That decision is the hinge of this chapter. The Roman plan for 218 had been disrupted, but it had not collapsed. One Scipio turned toward the Po Valley, the other kept the western front alive. So the question is not simply why Rome fought in Spain. The sharper question is why Spain became Rome's second war against Hannibal. The answer is that Spain was Hannibal's beginning, and Rome could not allow it to become Hannibal's renewal. Livy's account of the first allocations makes the scale plain. Publius Scipio had Spain, Sempronius had Sicily and the African prospect. Rome expected a naval, Western Mediterranean war, with Carthage pressured in Spain and Africa before Hannibal could make Italy the center. Hannibal changed the order of operations by moving faster than Rome expected. Publius reached Massilia and learned that the enemy had already crossed the Rhone. The consul then chose the emergency. He returned to Italy to meet Hannibal while the army levied for Spain continued under Gnaeus. Livy later puts the justification into Publius' own mouth. The Spanish army, he says, is serving under his deputy and brother where the Senate and people had meant it to serve. The phrasing matters because Spain is not abandoned. The Roman front is split in two, but neither half is surrendered. Gnaeus landed at Emporiae, a Greek and Massalian connected place on the northeastern Spanish coast. The choice was practical. He needed a friendly harbor, a coastline that could be supplied by sea, and enough local distance from the main Barcid strongholds to establish a foothold before Hasdrubal could crush it. From there he moved south. The first decisive clash came near Cissa in the Tarraco region, where Hanno's force failed to stop him. Modern accounts differ in emphasis, but the pattern is steady. The Carthaginian screen north of the Ebro broke, Hanno was captured in the tradition, and Roman hands reached the baggage Hannibal had left behind. This was not the conquest of Spain. It was the seizure of a coastal lodgment. That distinction keeps the episode honest. Gnaeus did not march in and turn Iberia Roman by proclamation. He secured harbors, towns, allies, hostages, and a line of movement north of the Ebro. Tarraco then becomes more than a place name. Livy has Scipio leave a garrison there and winter there after suppressing revolts among peoples who had already given hostages. A base that can be garrisoned, supplied, and returned to is a different object from a battlefield won in a day. Hasdrubal tried to answer quickly. Livy describes an attack on Roman fleet parties who had grown careless in the countryside. That detail has the rough texture of real war because it is not grand strategy. Men leave the ships, forage too confidently, and discover that the enemy has not disappeared south of the Ebro. The Roman answer was not only tactical. Gnaeus moved against the Ilogetes and then the Orsitani. Fines, renewed hostages, surrender, and winter quarters followed. Spain becomes a war of small levers: ships, hostages, local grievances, garrisons, and the punishment of towns that reconsider their first bargain. By the end of that first campaign season, The Roman army had done the most important thing it could do. It had made the road from Barcid, Spain, to Hannibal less simple. A route that has to pass through hostile harbors, watched rivers, and wavering local peoples is no longer just a route. It is a front. The Ebro was already politically charged because the earlier treaty had made it a line of Roman and Carthaginian calculation. In the war itself, it became a physical hinge. North of it, Rome tried to build durability. South of it, Hasdrubal still held the deeper Barcid system. In 217 BC, Hasdrubal came toward the Ebro with land forces and a fleet. The Roman and Mycelian ships caught the Carthaginian naval force badly positioned near the river mouth. Hunt emphasizes the disorder of crews scattered ashore. Livy emphasizes the result, with ships captured or sunk and the coast suddenly open to Roman reach. The numbers vary in the retellings, so the script does not need a false precision. The important point is operational. After the Ebro naval victory, Rome and its Mycelian allies could move along the coast with a confidence Carthage had just lost. Livy makes that reach visible by sending Roman activity down the coast, toward the country around New Carthage, toward Longuntica, toward Ebusus, and into the diplomatic field of Spanish communities that now had reason to believe the Barcid grip could be challenged. He also gives a very large political number, more than 120 Spanish peoples coming to Scipio. That should not be read like a modern census table. It is a statement of shock and reputation. The naval battle changed what local communities thought could be survived. Then Publius arrived. Livy gives him 20 warships, 8,000 men and supplies, and he records the joy at Tarraco when the brothers joined. The father of Africanus had left Italy's emergency to return to the Western plan. Spain was no longer Gnaeus' isolated command. The brothers then crossed the Ebro and moved towards Saguntum because hostages from all over Spain were held there. That detail is the key to the Barcid system. A hostage center is not a footnote. It is the machinery by which empire reaches into families, councils, and local futures. The Abelux story in Livy belongs to that same machinery. However polished the episode has become in Roman telling, its political logic is clear enough. If hostages can be transferred from Carthaginian control to Roman control, allegiance can move with them, not because anyone has become sentimental, but because risk has been recalculated. This is where Spain stops being an offstage source of soldiers and becomes a war of command systems. Hasdrubal had to keep men loyal, keep ports working, keep the south rich, and keep the route north available. The Scipios had to make every one of those tasks more difficult. The great test came around Dertosa or Ibera, usually placed in 215 BC. Hasdrubal needed to open the way north. If he pushed the Scipios out, he could attempt the road toward the Pyrenees and then toward Hannibal. The battle, therefore, mattered far beyond the riverbank. The Roman victory there did not become another Cannae. It mattered because it prevented one. Hasdrubal's army did not become the second Barcid army in Italy. The Spanish front absorbed men, command attention, and local politics that Hannibal badly needed elsewhere. That is why this episode has to be told alongside Trebia, Trasimene, Cannae, Syracuse, and Capua. In Italy, Hannibal defeats Roman armies. In Spain, the Scipios fight the conditions that would let those victories become a permanent strategic avalanche. Rome was not fighting Hannibal's body in Spain. It was fighting Hannibal's supply chain, his brother, his family's political inheritance, and the Western base that made his Italian gamble possible. That is enough to make Spain a second war against Hannibal. The danger in telling the Spanish War is to make the Iberian peoples into pieces that Roman and Carthaginian commanders move across a board. The sources themselves tempt that simplification because they report submissions, revolts, hostages, and betrayals from the perspective of armies. But the communities were not counters. They were calculating actors in a violent environment. Some had suffered under Barcid pressure. Some had gained from Barcid money. Some feared Rome. Some used Rome. Some tried to survive by switching sides at the moment when one empire looked less dangerous than the other. The Barcid system had never been only military. The base was already there. New Carthage as harbor, palace, arsenal, treasury, hostage center, administrative hub, and symbol. Silver from the interior and soldiers from local alliances were as important as battlefield genius. Roman power arrived with its own tools. There were alliances, hostages, fines, garrisons, naval protection, punishment, and the promise that Carthage could be resisted. Rome did not need every community to love it. It needed enough communities to decide that Carthage no longer looked inevitable. Livy's Ilogetes, Orsitani, Indibiles, Mandonius, and Celtiberians show the pattern. Allegiance in Spain is not a line painted once. It is a surface constantly rubbed by fear, opportunity, kinship, local rivalry, and the visible strength of whichever army has just won. O'Connell's phrase about quicksand is useful because it keeps success from looking cleaner than it was. For nearly 6 years, the Scipios kept Carthaginian power off balance, but their footing rested on Spanish tribal politics that could shift under them with terrifying speed. The Roman goal, in this reading, was not necessarily to make Spain Roman. That would come later, slowly and violently. The immediate goal was to make Spain not securely Carthaginian and to seal the western road to Italy. The wider Carthaginian world also mattered. Syphax's revolt in North Africa pulled Hasdrubal's attention across the sea. The Spanish front was connected to Numidia, Carthage, Sardinia, Sicily, Italy, and the whole post-Cannae problem of keeping allies supplied across water Rome could still contest. This is the opposite of a simple side theater. Spain is a pressure chamber connected to every other chamber. A revolt in Africa can weaken Hasdrubal in Spain. A Roman fleet on the Ebro can weaken Hannibal in Italy. A hostage released at Saguntum can alter the calculation of a town far inland. The Scipios succeeded long enough for Rome to survive the worst years after Cannae, but they did it without the steady reinforcement one would expect if Spain were secure. Modern summaries stress that after Publius arrived in 217, the brothers had to hold a widening front with limited Roman manpower. That meant more reliance on Spanish auxiliaries, allied tribes, mercenaries, and garrison towns. Every success created more territory to watch. Every new ally created a new obligation. Every advance south made the rear longer and the political bargain thinner. The temptation was obvious. If Rome pressed farther toward the Beates and the Barcid heartland, it might damage the source of Hannibal's strength more deeply. But a force built from Roman legions, local alliances, and paid fighters can become brittle precisely when it looks large. By the last phase of the elder Scipio's command, Carthage had multiple commanders in Spain: Hasdrubal Barca, Mago Barca, Hasdrubal son of Gisco, and Numidian cavalry under the young Massinissa. The Barcid system had not disappeared. It had been held down, not destroyed. The Scipios saw those forces separated and made a decision that can look reasonable from a distance. They split their own army. Publius would move against Mago and Hasdrubal son of Gisco near the Castulo and Upper Beates region. Gnaeus would face Hasdrubal Barca. This was not foolish, because ancient commanders forgot that concentration matters. It was risky because the map was not the whole situation. The armies were not made of interchangeable blocks. Each column depended on local allies, mercenaries, scouts, and communities whose loyalty had to be maintained under pressure. Publius moved deep enough for danger to gather around him. Hunt's modern retelling emphasizes Massinissa's Numidian cavalry, Indibiles blocking or threatening the rear, and Mago and Hasdrubal's son of Gisco converging. The Roman commander was not struck by one clean blow. He was squeezed. Massinissa matters here because he is not yet Rome's later ally at Zama. In this episode, he belongs to Carthage's Spanish War, riding pressure into the Roman flank. The future alliance has not happened. The young Numidian prince is still one of the forces making Publius' position fail. Publius was killed near Castulo in the tradition. The sources do not need embroidery. The father who had turned back from Massilia to meet Hannibal and later crossed to Spain to join his brother, died in the Spanish theater he had refused to abandon. Gnaeus' collapse came differently. He faced Hasdrubal Barca with a force whose Celtiberian mercenaries could be reached by Carthaginian money and persuasion. Livy and the modern summaries agree on the strategic effect, even where details vary. The local and hired element on which Roman depth depended could be pulled away. That desertion is the dark answer to the hostage and alliance scenes earlier in the episode. The same political world that had made Roman success possible now made Roman disaster possible. Spain had not become a stable Roman base. It had become an unstable anti-Carthaginian coalition under stress. Gnaeus tried to retreat. The tradition places him near Ilorca or Ilorcae, throwing together a desperate position with baggage on a rocky height while Punic forces closed in. It is a scene of improvisation after political collapse, not a planned last stand from a heroic painting. He too was killed. Later Roman memory compresses the disaster into a brutal interval: father and uncle dead within 30 days, armies destroyed, survivors forced back toward the Ebro. Livy's later Fabius speech preserves the shock of that memory even while using it for another argument. The chronology carries some ancient source tension, and the episode should not hide that. The final campaigns are usually placed across 212 and 211 BC in modern narrative, with the Roman crisis and response belonging to the 211 setting of this chapter. The safer language is disaster in 212-211, not an overconfident day-by-day reconstruction. The meaning is clear even if every movement is not. Rome lost the men who had kept Spain from becoming Hannibal's second engine. The line fell back to the Ebro. Tarraco became precious again because it was what remained when the southern advance was gone. For a moment, the road to Italy was more open than it had been since Gnaeus landed at Emporiae. That fact should make the disaster feel strategic, not only familial. Hannibal's brother had space again. But Carthage did not turn that opening into a joined Italian invasion. The reasons are familiar by now: divided commands, logistics, quarrels, local instability, and the difficulty of making Spanish power move as one instrument. The Scipios failed, but their enemies still could not make Spain behave like a single machine. The survivors did not simply dissolve. Livy remembers Lucius Marcius, elevated by the soldiers in emergency, a non-standard command born from necessity rather than constitutional neatness. The detail matters because it shows how close the Spanish front came to being lost as a Roman institution. Rome then sent help. Mackay places the reinforcement moment after Syracuse and Capua had been recovered, when the Republic could again spare attention for Spain. Gaius Claudius Nero arrived before the younger Scipio, bringing force back into a theater that had nearly broken. The young Publius Cornelius Scipio, later Africanus, enters the story through a vacancy made by disaster. That is important for tone. His Spanish command will later be told as brilliance, daring, New Carthage, Baecula, Ilipa, and Zama's long prelude. But the door opens because his father and uncle are dead. Spain had been Hannibal's beginning. It had also become Rome's school. The Republic learned there that the Hannibalic War could not be solved only by finding Hannibal in Italy. It had to be fought against ports, family commands, silver systems, hostage networks, and the unstable politics of allied peoples. That is why Spain became Rome's second war against Hannibal, not because Hannibal stood there, but because the things that sustained him did. The Scipios spent 6 years making those things harder to use. Their achievement was incomplete, and their end was catastrophic. Both facts have to stand together. They blocked Hasdrubal long enough for Rome to survive, and then they overreached into a political world they could not fully control. The next Spanish chapter begins with that contradiction still on the table. The Ebro line has held by a thread. New Carthage still waits in the south. The young Scipio is coming not to inherit a victory, but to decide whether the wreckage of his family's war can be turned into Rome's Western answer to Hannibal.